So while we are working on PowerPoint, the title of my paper is The Strange Case of the Siege Notes in the Diplomatic Pouch. I want to make a point of disclosure. I work on TAMIZDAT very marginally, but this is what happens. I think for the last 7 years of our friendship, I've listened non-stop to Yasha's stories about TAMIZDAT and felt that it's only fair to torture him with my stories about the siege literature and siege research. And at some point, these stories, I think, connected. And this point of connection, microphone, and this point of connection is what I'm willing to present to you today. Epigraph. Wall. In this same interlude, it doth befall that I, one snout by name, present a wall. Thus have I, wall, my part discharged so, and being done, thus wall away doth go. My epigraph comes from Shakespeare's Midsummer's Night's Dream, where the actors decide to stage the old story of Pyramus and Thisbe, two lovers, tragically separated by the wall. Their playful yet poignant ways to outsmart the situation of separation reminded me of how authors to the east and to the west of the so-called Iron Wall, another construct of imagination. For example, this is what happened to the authors presented in my remarks today. And the story will be of how they attempted to overcome their own separation, textually and logistically. My central research questions are: how presence of the wall influences the text that is woven from its different sides? And can the very presence of the wall be a factor of textual production? How separation can produce a text? This presentation today reflects an inquiry that once led me to analyze papers of Harrison Salisbury, archived today in the special collections of Columbia University. And I would like to thank NYU University for the help with this research. Salisbury, I would like to remind us all, was a brilliant journalist, a maverick, a person of scandal. He knew writing success and disaster. He traveled worldwide and participated in active military action. He wrote in many genres. He wrote the strangest novel I ever read, dedicated to the Leningrad affair, called Северная Пальмира. I really want to recommend it. I really need another reader for this text with whom I could share my endless surprise. Salisbury wrote about China, Vietnam, Ukraine, and centrally and obsessively about Soviet Union. Yet even this illustrious resume doesn't fully explain how he wrote a book about the siege, 900 days, that up to this day remains, to my understanding, perhaps the most sensible, the subtlest account of the intellectual, cultural, and emotional life in the city.
Do you want something on?
Yes, and this is what Yasha is working on.
Oh, okay.
An emotional life in the city, in addition to bringing to light some of the darkest, the most complex aspects and secrets of that historical disaster. The forte of this book, looking at the historical event through the lens of the myriad of individual lives and behaviors. Salisbury follows multiple lives that intersected there and then. And that, I fancy, makes this a truly journalistic approach, showing the siege as a collision of individual stories and individual choices. Specifically, I went to the special collections hoping to figure out how Salisbury worked with his sources. So basically this was the question, and I think I found some answers that I will share with you today. My question was, since he never was able to travel to the Soviet Union. Yep. While working on this book, what kind of source base he was using and how he was using it. And what I was lucky to find in the archive shed generous and surprising light on how an American scholar, an American journalist, an American writer actually was able to weave various source databases. The history of the book. Salisbury arrives in Leningrad from Moscow in 1944 after the siege was already lifted, actually in February already. And why he goes to Leningrad is also kind of remarkable. It's an escape. Salisbury goes to Leningrad after he burns his room in the Metropole Hotel in the course of the affair and being drunk. And one of the first things that I found in the archive was a shot that Metropole Hotel presented to the remarkable journalist. So he arrives in Leningrad kind of in a special state of mind, we can imagine. He is very ready to have a fresh start, and he begins making his remarks of what he saw there. And the first text that I found on the kind of consequence of the siege, he goes to Peterhof, that is completely ruinated, and creates a remarkable urban, spatial text of the ruined city. He describes Peterhof completely annihilated by actually both armies, by the Soviets and by the Nazis. It took him 25 years to finish the book. What is also interesting, that at the beginning, Salisbury, a leading journalist, New York Times in Moscow, doesn't speak any Russian. By the end of the story, Salisbury's Russian was remarkable, which I think is also interesting, how language becomes a part of this adventure. Another aspect that is kind of important for the story, that while Salisbury is working on the story, Leningrad affair happens, and basically he's totally cut out of his sources, as you can imagine. Part one, so this was introduction, part one, reading and questioning, Salisbury and Darv. So what was the actual point of curiosity? I could not imagine how Salisbury wrote his book, understanding that he was mainly using was official sources. And his research of the official sources, his collection of the official sources, in what I understand is unprecedented. Basically, he found every tiny article, every tiny text published on the siege in the Soviet Union. And in the archive, we see these endless lists of everything published in every journal, in every republic. So that is very impressive, and nevertheless, these are censored, publishable texts. So how of this kind of material he produces texts of a clearly anti-Soviet stance? That was my first question, and I found some answers. The instrument that Salisbury invented, basically, was a set of questionnaires. I was very ready to show you the questionnaires, but I can describe them for you. is the only non-Soviet fictional full-length novel about the events. Darov survives the siege in the city as a journalist, student, and then he is evacuated in the spring in 1942 to the Caucasus, which is a very important moment. This is when a huge part of the Leningrad University is evacuated, and this is where they are occupied, right? German forces occupy Caucasus, and as a result, a rather significant part of Leningrad intelligentsia chooses to follow Germans to the west after the siege experience. And Darov is one of them. He writes his novel, and in New York he meets with Salisbury. Salisbury includes retelling of 2 chapters of the novel, basically in toto, in his book. And as you can imagine, first and foremost is the cannibalism chapter. And this is basically how the story of the cannibalism becomes not only a part of Darov's text that nobody knows in spite of all my pathetic attempts, but this is thanks to Salisbury, who names Darov as his conversational partner. This is how the story becomes known. And also what is interesting, Darov is one of many people whom Salisbury interviews. That was a very interesting finding, many letters between Salisbury and Darov, and I was kind of very satisfied with this. And after I read these letters, I noticed something that I really wanted to show you, but won't. So I noticed маленькая тетрадочка в красной обложке, a little notepad in the red leather bounding. And when I began reading it, I understood that it's not Darov, that it's something that is extraordinary, that is something that I do not understand. And now I will describe this text for you. Somebody sent Salisbury, or delivered to Salisbury, as I could understand, his commentaries for the first edition of 900 Days. Somebody made it his effort, basically, not only to imply, to suggest correction of many mistakes that Salisbury made, endless mistakes, in names, in topography, in dates. But in addition to this somebody offered his understanding of the siege culture. And another very interesting thing, that the commentary was written in brilliant English, of the unpleasant Nabokovian quality, which completely confused me, because I began imagining that maybe this somebody was like Darov and many others, one of the people who found themselves in the West, somebody who made it to the West after the war. So I was sitting there and reading this commentary, and also, crucially, this person, a part of this commentary is this person also was telling his story of the siege. So since I'm a student of Professor Matic, for me this was an interesting moment of a different kind of palimpsest, of a personal palimpsest, not temporal, not spatial, but basically triggered by Salisbury's text. This person, I didn't know at the beginning who it was reacting to the American text with his siege story. And I became absolutely fascinated. Also, things that I was reading, I was obscenely giggling reading the siege commentary. The favorite character of the commentator was Iosif Arbeli, director of the Hermitage, who, according to the author of the commentary, saved the author's life, basically by not allowing the author of the commentary to go to the army. And things that the author tells us about Arbeli, that he was a tyrant, that he was brilliant, that he absolutely didn't care about the money, and was able to support, wanted to support everybody about him, that yes, he saved the Hermitage collection by the sheer force of personal despotism. And there, I also wanted to show it to you in big letters. And he was a remarkable lover. So I felt that this kind of information about the siege story really adds and gives us something that we really need as the siege scholars. So kind of in the state of unhealthy agitation, I went out and began calling not only my mom, but like everybody I could in Petersburg, asking who knew that Tarbeli was a great lover. And the third call said it could be this person, and it was this person. Because on page 527, and actually maybe I could download on the conference website, because I really wanted to share it with you. So I'm sitting here reading this. State of total shock and happiness, and there it comes, commentary now to the page 527, it's paged. And I read, you know what, I'm really tired of the idea, I don't like the idea of being anonymous to you. I think you should know my name. My name is Igor Dyakonov. Igor Dyakonov is the leading Vostokoved of Petersburg at the moment. His English is so strange because he spent his childhood in Norway. And this feeling of abnormality of English, like preciousness of English, comes from this fact. Dyakonov really worked in the Hermitage at the beginning of the siege. He really knew all these people, Bergolz and Akhmatova and Arbeli and many, many others. And what he says on this, in this commentary to the page 527, first he thanks Salisbury in the most excited terms, exalted terms for his book, saying that your mistakes are numerous, endless. Your book is remarkable and very important for me. And I think this kind of marked the collaboration. So since I suspect always in my life that I'm running out of time, the end of the story, and then conclusive questions, Salisbury used the commentary and the suggestions by Dyakonov in the next edition of the book, 1985. Salisbury corrects all the mistakes, thanks to Dyakonov. So the next edition of Salisbury's book is a collaborative project, thanks to the Titradechka that was delivered to Salisbury in the diplomatic pouch. So for me, this moment of collaboration became kind of the answer of how two sides work together. In the introduction to the new edition, second edition of the book, Dyakonov says thank you to his reader Anatoly Fedorov. This is what Dyakonov says, call me Anatoly Fedorov. In his, they never met, Dyakonov and Salisbury, but they exchanged many letters with the help of Efim Etkin. And these letters, and also some of them are in the archives, and some of them are in Etkin archive. But what Salisbury wrote through Etkin to Dyakonov, that the real problem is that I cannot include your commentaries in its fullness. I don't have a kind of volume for it in the book. And also I cannot claim this text as my own. You need to do something with it. Not long before his death, and he was in his 90s, Dyakonov wrote his Книга воспоминаний, which is absolutely remarkable. And some of his stories that he wrote, that he shared with Salisbury, and I think that were triggered by Salisbury's book, are included there, but most are not. So my question for you, my question for myself, my question for us as people who work on TAMIZDAT, since we have obviously a hope of publication of our materials, is what would be the adequate form of publication of Diakonov's intervention into Salisbury's work? How do we publish a text triggered by the text of the other, triggered by the text of the other so far away, triggered by the text of the other so far away that one invites in his work so personally? Thank you so much.
Maybe now.